I still remember the sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even sharp. Just a soft, broken sound, like the world taking a breath it would never give back. I was 10. My brother Samuel was 8. And that day, we were supposed to be building paper boats by the river. It was spring in Ohio, the kind of day where the air smells like rain and everything feels possible. We ran barefoot through the tall grass, laughing, shouting, alive. He always ran ahead, faster, braver. He used to turn back and yell, "Ethan, come on! You're too slow!" And I'd laugh and chase him, pretending not to care. That's the last time I remember hearing his laugh. The river looked calm that day, but the current was stronger than it seemed. We leaned too far, one small push, one slip, and suddenly he was gone. The water swallowed him before I could even scream. I jumped in. I remember the cold like 1,000 needles against my skin. I remember grabbing his hand for a second, and then it slipped away. When they pulled me out, I was still calling his name, over and over, but the river never gave him back. Everyone told me it wasn't my fault. The police, the neighbors, my parents. But I saw their eyes when they looked at me, and I knew. They didn't believe it. Neither did I. That night, my father sat beside me in silence. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. A week later, we buried him. A small, white coffin, too light for what it carried. I remember standing by the grave, my hands shaking. A letter hidden inside my pocket. I had written it the night before. A letter to Samuel. "Dear Sam," it said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to let go. Please, forgive me." But I never put it in the ground. I couldn't. I thought maybe, someday, when I was braver, I would send it. I never did. Years went by. The letter stayed hidden in the back of a drawer, folded and forgotten. Or, at least, I pretended it was. But the truth is, I never stopped hearing the sound. That soft, broken sound. The moment the river took him. And every success, every smile, every applause I've ever received since then, it always faded beneath that memory. People call me inspiring. They say my books bring them hope. But what they don't know is that every story I've ever written is just another version of that same boy trying to save his brother. Because you don't grow out of guilt. You just learn to live around it. And sometimes, late at night, when the world goes quiet, I still whisper his name. Sam. And I swear, somewhere deep in the sound of the wind, I can almost hear him whisper back, "It's okay, Ethan." But even after all these years, I've never really believed it. Because I know the truth. The truth that I never told anyone. The one that still burns inside me like a secret I can't let go. That accident? It wasn't just an accident. It was me. I pushed him. I just didn't mean to. The house was never the same after that day. It wasn't the silence that hurt. It was the way silence sounded different. Like every wall, every floorboard, every echo carried his name. My mother stopped cooking. My father stopped speaking. and I stopped being a child. I remember sitting at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair across from me. It used to belong to Samuel. Now it was just a reminder. The first week, I waited for someone to blame me. The second week, I started blaming myself. By the third, I stopped talking altogether. School didn't feel real anymore. People whispered when I walked by. Their eyes were full of pity, and pity feels worse than hate. My teacher, Mrs. Collins, once said, "Time heals everything, Ethan." But she was wrong. Time doesn't heal, it hides. It buries the pain under days and months until you almost forget. Almost. Every night I used to dream about the river. The water was calm at first, then darker, deeper, louder. And in every dream I could see his hand reaching up, but I always woke before I could reach back. I began writing. At first, it was just a few words in a notebook, words I was too afraid to say out loud. Then stories. Stories about brothers who found their way home, about forgiveness, about second chances. Writing became the only way I could breathe. The pages didn't judge me. They didn't look away. When I turned 16, I left home. I told my parents I wanted to study in another state. But the truth was, I couldn't live in that house anymore. It was like drowning in memories. I moved to Chicago, a city full of noise, strangers, and lights so bright they almost made me forget the dark. Almost. I worked at a diner during the day and wrote at night. Sometimes when I'd wipe the tables clean, I'd imagine Samuel sitting there, swinging his legs, smiling, asking if I was finally okay. I wasn't. Years went by. I started publishing my stories online. People loved them. They called me the writer who feels too deeply. Some said my words healed them. And every time someone said, "Your story saved me," I'd smile. But inside I'd whisper, I couldn't even save him. One night, after a book signing, a woman came up to me, tears in her eyes, and said, "My son drowned last year. Your book helped me breathe again." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there frozen, because for the first time, someone saw me not as an author, but as a broken soul who understood loss. That night, I went home and took out the old letter, the one I had written to Samuel when I was 10. The paper was yellowed, fragile, the words faded, but the guilt still fresh. I read it aloud for the first time in 20 years, and for a moment I felt something I hadn't felt in forever, a strange kind of peace. Not forgiveness, not healing, just peace. But peace never stays, because the very next morning, a small box arrived at my door. No name, no return address, just a single note inside. It said, "Ethan, I forgive you." The handwriting. It was his. Samuel's. I must have stared at that letter for hours. It couldn't be real. It shouldn't be real. I ran my fingers over the paper, same handwriting, same curves, same way he used to draw the S like a lightning bolt. But Samuel had been gone for 25 years. And the note, it was dated yesterday. I felt my chest tighten. Maybe someone was playing a cruel joke. Maybe it was my mind, finally breaking after all these years. But deep down, I knew that handwriting. I felt it. The rest of the day was a blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't write. Every sound felt louder. Every shadow felt closer. At night, I dreamed again, the same river, the same cold water, the same outstretched hand. But this time, Samuel's voice whispered, "It's time, Ethan." When I woke up, I was crying. The note still lay on the desk right where I left it. I grabbed it, turned it over. And there was something else now. Another sentence that wasn't there before. Come home. I dropped the paper. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely breathe. I hadn't been back to my hometown in more than 2 decades. That house, that river, I'd promised myself I'd never go back. But I had to. Something inside me needed to know. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove. Miles and miles of highway disappeared beneath me. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like the town itself remembered me. When I reached the old house, it looked smaller. Time had peeled the paint, but the memories were untouched. Every corner still whispered our names. Inside, dust coated everything, like a second skin. The silence was familiar, almost comforting. And then I saw it, on the table by the window. Another letter. Same paper, same handwriting. My heart pounded as I unfolded it. This one said, "You never let go. That's why I stayed." The air went cold. The lights flickered, and for a moment I swore I could see him, standing by the river outside, smiling that same innocent smile. I stumbled to the door, ran down to the water. The river hadn't changed. Still quiet, still endless. I whispered, "Samuel, if you're here." The wind answered, soft and slow, almost like a breath. Then for just a heartbeat, I saw ripples forming in the water, as if someone had stepped in, but there was no one there. And yet I felt him. The warmth, the forgiveness, the peace. It wasn't haunting me anymore. It was guiding me. For the first time, I realized something I'd been too blind to see. Samuel wasn't asking me to come home to a place. He was asking me to come home to myself, to the boy who still waited for forgiveness, to the man who never stopped running. That night, I sat by the river until dawn, the note in my hand, and whispered, "I'm home, little brother. I'm finally home." The sun rose over the river, turning the water gold. For a long time, I just sat there, watching the light crawl across the surface. The same river that once took everything from me now looked like it was giving something back. Peace. Real, quiet peace. I hadn't felt it in decades. For so long, my life had been about running, from grief, from guilt, from memories I couldn't change. But that morning, I realized something simple. I wasn't running anymore. I was remembering. And remembering isn't the same as hurting. I opened the old letters again. The paper felt warm in my hands, as if the words themselves were alive. Come home. You never let go. I forgive you. 3 short sentences, but somehow they carried an entire lifetime. I looked at the river and said quietly, "I forgive me too." And for the first time since that day, the water didn't look like loss anymore. It looked like release. I went back to the house later that day. It didn't scare me now. The walls didn't feel heavy. The silence didn't scream. It just existed. Like an old photograph, faded, but beautiful. I cleaned the dust, opened the windows, and placed Samuel's photo on the shelf again. This time, I didn't hide it away. This time, I let the light fall on it. Then I sat down at my desk and began to write. Not about pain, but about peace. Not about death, but about life after. The words came easily. They always do when they're honest. I wrote, "Some stories don't end. They become part of who we are, guiding us, shaping us, reminding us that love doesn't disappear. It just changes form." Months later, the book was finished. I called it The River Between Us. It wasn't a story about loss anymore. It was a story about connection, the invisible thread between two souls. When it was published, people wrote letters, emails, messages. They said things like, "I finally forgave myself. I talked to my brother again. I don't feel alone anymore." And every time I read one, I smiled, because I finally understood what Samuel's forgiveness really meant. He didn't come back to fix me. He came back to show me that I was never broken. One evening, I returned to the river one last time. The water was calm. The sunset painted the sky in fire and gold. I whispered, "Thank you, Sam." And for just a second, the wind shifted, and I heard his laugh, soft, distant, like it had traveled through time just to find me again. That's when I knew he was never really gone. He was the whisper in the wind, the light on the water, the peace I'd been searching for all along. And as I walked away, I didn't look back, because for the first time in my life, I didn't have to.